I am happy to have Automotive Seminars as a sponsor for the show. Now, if you're not familiar, Automotive Seminars is a diagnostic technician training company. They've got a website that there'll be a link to in the show notes. And what they offer is top-notch training to technicians like us in the field. I've been taking their training courses for years and have got a ton of benefit out of it. They've got top-notch instructors, John Thornton, Scott Shotton, Scott Manna, and every other month they've got a 2-night course that you can sign up for. Join in, ask questions, and afterwards, you've paid for the course, you can access a recorded version whenever you want. You can rewatch the class 2 years later in case you wanted some details on it, and that is a fantastic feature. So make sure to check out the website to see what courses they have available and what's coming up in the future. This podcast is brought to you by Jarhead Diagnostics. Jarhead Diagnostics manufactures in-house diagnostic equipment and storage solutions, as well as distributes for companies like Pico, ATS, and TopDon. One of my favorite tools that I've bought from Brandon and Jarhead Diag is the case for the U-Scope. If you don't have a U-Scope, you probably should, but if you have one, you got to get one of these 3D printed cases, has a magnet on it, has a full-size BNC lead that you can connect to, and it gets rid of the weak point of that scope, which is the mini BNC connection, which is pretty fragile. This case makes this thing nice and secure and makes it an even better tool than it was. So check out jarheaddiag.com. The link is in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. We have got Auto Rescue Tools and Isaac Rodell as a sponsor for this podcast. Hey guys, if you're looking for programming laptops, you want the laptop set up ready to go for programming control modules on vehicles, you need key cutting equipment, you need diagnostic tools, Isaac is your guy. Has all that stuff available for purchase, and the support that he offers along with the purchase has been outstanding. I bought some stuff from him in the past. I got my Dolphin key cutting tool from him several years back. And again, the support has been phenomenal. Helped me out along the way with anything additional I needed to make it work for me. Also, for the month of June 2023, they've got Autel updates for sale. So make sure to check that out as well. Again, that's autorescuetools.com. The link will be in the show notes. Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. With me, Sean Tipping. I'm going to be your host today. Joining me today on the show is Devin Eckert. And Devin is a technician at an Audi performance shop in St. Louis, Missouri. We've been chatting on Facebook for quite a while. He's been dealing with a couple very interesting Audis with some interesting problems. And that's actually one of the reasons he's coming on the show today, is to share a couple case studies with me for problem vehicles that he's recently dealt with. One of them, very interesting what the resolution was to the problem. We're also going to chat a little bit about the industry as far as mentorship goes, dealer versus independent world, and service information. So this is a really great talk. I enjoyed chatting with Devin. So with that out of the way, let's jump right in. Cool, man. Well, how's it going? How's your week going for you so far?
Oh, it's good, man. I got the Audi S6, which is the second car I guess I've mentioned to you about. I got that one going yesterday. Got the engine back in, and I was actually driving around today to, make sure it's all good. And so far things are really looking good on it, so I'm really excited.
Nice. Yeah, that's the one I definitely want to hear about. It's pretty interesting for sure. And you had messaged me a couple times along the way, and I don't know how much assistance I was, but it was interesting to hear what was going on. I was definitely curious to see the final, but it's good that you got there, and I want to hear the story of how you got there. But why don't we start off? You just want to introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do, how long you've been doing it.
Yeah, sure. I'm Devin. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I guess been working in cars since, I guess, for the last 10 years.
Okay. How'd you get into it?
And man, it has been to say a journey is an understatement.
Okay.
I started out with, I got my first car, and my, our neighbor, he worked on cars, and my dad was handy with cars, but wasn't actually like, in the professional industry. But my neighbor was, and he's like, oh, well, we're going to paint it. And I was like, all right. And it was a 93 Camaro.
Nice.
And yeah, the OptiSpark goodness. And well, anyway, so he showed me how to do it, and then as things went along, how to fix it. And so I ended up going to tech school here in St. Louis for collision work.
Okay.
And just sort of through disagreements with being, fresh out of school and management and stuff, and their expectations to the places closing down, I actually ended up just to keep a job and keep income, I ended up turning wrenches on semis just for a few months.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And that was, I don't know if you could pay me enough to go do that again.
Yeah. I've never worked on anything close to that size. I don't even know what that would be like. The tools all have to be a lot bigger, right? The wrench has got to be bigger.
Oh, dude, like when you have to take off a tire, you're like, oh man, like this is all right. Like you better eat your Wheaties today, because you have a 1-inch impact that weighs 100 pounds, and it's no joke.
Well, yeah, you must have to have a couple people to move some of the stuff around too, huh?
Oh yeah, there was and again, I was 20 at the time working there, so I was still super young. And I remember they had me they were already assembled 4 9-inch style differentials, but they were in this semi, it had 2 of them tandem axle, and they're like, all right, change those out. And so just to get those out and then move them around, you had to use the overhead crane. And I'm like, man, this is wild.
Wow. And maybe you don't know, but how's the pay for something like that if you continue with it and you're a top level tech working on semis? I mean, is it comparable to automotive? Way more, less? I know nothing
when
about
I
it.
was there. Sure. Okay. When I was there, I remember, and it could have, mind you, it could have just been this place that I was at, but it was a Kenworth dealership. But hearing what some of the older dudes who had been there, 10, 20, 25 years, what they were making, I'm like, why are you guys here? It was, it was like low 20s, 20 an hour salary, no flat rate, or no, excuse me, hourly. And it's like, man, I thought you guys were supposed to make a ton of money, and I'm finding out different.
Interesting. Yeah. I'd be curious to know if
if it's different elsewhere, because yeah, that's got to be just backbreaking work on those things. But
Oh yeah.
all right, so you did the semi thing for a while, and then where'd you go from there?
Oh, so yeah. So, I did learn, I guess, your basics on diesels at that time, learning from the guys, and then a few like little classes they sent us to, the younger guys. And anyway, the owner came in one day and was like, "Hey, we're shutting it down." And I went from first shift to second shift to third shift back, and then they eliminated third shift, eliminated second shift, and I was back on the first shift, and figured out they were cutting that, and I'm like, I need a job quick. And I found out they needed someone with any sort of diesel experience on Mercedes Sprinter vans at a Mercedes dealership here in St. Louis.
Okay.
And so that's how I got into the dealership world.
Gotcha. So you had to work on Sprinters for a while, huh?
Yeah, I did a little over 4 years.
I'm sorry.
Man, I didn't, it had its pros and cons, really, because nobody else wanted to do it. Everyone left you alone.
I suppose so. Well, and if you're at the dealer, were you supplied with the proper tooling to do that?
Yes and no. It was all we had, thankful enough, we had a 4-post. So an alignment rack was the only rack I had. We didn't have a 2-post, which I've seen some shops use a 2-post on them, like a loaded, cargo Sprinter, and they're pretty sketchy. And so I never really cared. I didn't care not having one, but some of them, our garage doors were pretty small, so some of them wouldn't even fit in the building. So there were some days, cold and hot, where I was working outside in the parking lot.
Yeah, I've been there myself, the parking lot stuff. I remember doing I worked at a shop where we kind of just took everything in, like a boat, a tractor, motorcycle, 4-wheeler, whatever came in. The owner just wanted, okay, we'll try to do something to it. And we took an RV in, I mean, big, huge thing. And they had us do a transmission on it. And the shop wasn't even close to big enough to fit this thing inside, let alone get it up on a hoist. So of course we do it out in the parking lot, and that's the job that I got. So I remember being out in the parking lot doing the transmission on this massive RV. The only good thing about it was once you pulled the doghouse cover that was on the back of the engine, you had access to everything you wanted to, and you basically just sit there and take all the bell housing bolts out right from the top. But then getting it up off the ground and bolted up, that was a pain.
Yeah, holy smokes. So did it drop out of the bottom, or could you unbolt it and bring it to the top?
You probably could have gotten it through the top, but we took it out the bottom because we were working with very limited equipment. I'll just say that.
Sure.
Floor jacks and blocks of wood. So
was it at least a nice parking lot, or was it just beat up? And
yeah, I mean, it was asphalt. It was a gas station parking lot, so at least there was that. But
okay, yeah, not the worst.
Right. Yeah. Also not the best. And, looking back on jobs like that, you're like, okay, well, maybe the situation I'm in right now, maybe it sucks on this hoist, but at least I'm not laying in a parking lot doing this, so gives you a little bit of perspective.
There was a few times where if we thought the Sprinter van would fit inside, we would, let the air out of tires and have 10 guys stand on the rear bumper to see if we can lower it enough to squeeze it inside. Because once you got inside, it opened up. So it was just clearing the garage little area.
Okay. So then where'd you head after doing that or how long were you at the Sprinter place?
I was there a little over 4 years.
Okay.
So it wasn't bad. I actually enjoyed it. I learned an incredible amount there.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in case you run into any of those down the road, at least you got a good frame of reference. Because I know, I know when I get one, I'm always scratching my head on where is this component or how does this work or what tool do I need. So I, like you said, I try to avoid them. So I I was one of those guys that would leave you alone and just let you work on it.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. It was, I learned a lot though, man. So that was one of the topics I could get into if you cared.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know very little about them. That's all I can say.
Well, no, just so as far as, like I think training up new techs, as you guys bring up a lot, in the other podcasts.
Yeah.
I do think there is a definite lack of, whether it's hard to find or there's just really no structure for it, but lack of mentorships for, young techs who are really wanting to learn a good way.
Sure. I would totally agree with that in the majority of shops. There are shops that do that. There are dealerships that do that. But I think if you look at it as a whole, every single automotive shop or truck shop out there, the majority aren't doing something like that. Yes, they'll train somebody, they'll get somebody in and they'll work with them, but there's not a, like you said, structure in place. Like, we're going to take you from here to here. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's, there's goals laid out and, things that you'll achieve and people that you work with specifically. That definitely would benefit our industry so much more if it was in place everywhere or close to everywhere. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I compare it for the longest time, and I still do. I try to figure out a way, like, okay, how could you make this more like the labor unions that are out there, the carpenters, electricians, where like you start out at this and then after this and I get it, there's pros and cons to everything, but at least it gives the younger guys coming up some goals and like, okay, cool. Like if I stick with it, I'll be here and, and all that. And it seems they teach the same way of doing things, if that makes sense. Like I guess a pipe fitter, like, hey, if we're connecting pipe, here's how to do it, not 20 different ways to get it done.
Yeah. It's weird how the automotive industry got kind of left behind in that aspect, or maybe just never caught up. I don't know how you want to look at it, but that you can look to so many other trades and see an example of how it's done, electricians or plumbers or HVAC. I know an HVAC guy, a good friend of mine, and he was putting a furnace in my house, and I'm talking to him. He's like, yeah, we have this kid, he comes in, he works with me for, directly every day for a year plus. And we show him the ropes, show him what he needs to do. And then we can send him out on his own. And eventually he'll have his own person to train under him, where they're just working directly under somebody. And that's what they're getting paid to do for a certain period of time. But you don't see that as much in the automotive industry as everywhere else. And I wonder why. I don't have the answers to why, but it's curious.
Yeah. And it is every day. I'm like, okay, what could you put in place without a union or something, or, just some shops that get together, like, hey, this is how we're going to train people. If they come, if you're in this sort of group and this person is a journeyman within this group, then okay, we will agree that he knows his shit,
Yep. Well,
so,
I don't know if it was like this for you, but I know every shop that I worked at, whether I was just out of tech school or had a little bit of experience, maybe they'll set some limitations on the jobs they'll give you, but they're kind of just going to throw you in there and say, here you go. Here's the car you're working on. Here's the job we need you to get done. Bob's over there if you got a question, and you're just set loose to wreak havoc on someone's car, with very little, as far as a safety net or anything goes when you're just getting started. So, I mean, it's no wonder that a lot of young people don't last too long and end up leaving, because that is a tough situation. You're just thrown in the deep end and good luck.
Well, yeah, same thing happened with me. With the sprinters, like I think the first, besides, a few oil changes, oh, hey, this thing needs a transmission, go ahead and get after it. And it was like, okay, how do we get to the work procedures? Like, can you show me that first?
Yeah.
And then furthermore, like, why does it need a transmission? How did you figure that out? And at that point, it's we don't have time for that. Just start getting after it. And then and then again, you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm not sure why I'm doing this, but all right.
Yeah.
A skipped learning moment.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, yes, there's value to figuring stuff out for yourself, but it's got to be done in a controlled setting, with someone who's experienced and can kind of step in when it's necessary and be there for you, in that you have that there. It makes it a lot easier than just, hey, put this flex plate on this Ford Explorer. I remember that was one of my first jobs. I just got tossed. I was still in tech school, but I was working evenings at a repair shop. He's like, here's this flex plate, let's put it in. It's cracked. And I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. It took me like 4 days to do it. And it was just a disaster, because I was just trying to figure everything out for the first time myself, and really didn't have much of any assistance. But yeah, that's the way it is. I don't know if it's all because of the flat rate thing. Maybe that's just a cop out to blame flat rate for everything, but it is really interesting how you've talked to a lot of people and they've had that similar experience in this industry.
Yes, absolutely. And flat rate, that is I don't know if you call it a necessary evil. Like, it has its place, that's for sure, but It definitely creates an unimaginable amount of bad habits.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have some of those bad habits.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, at Mercedes, with learning so much, the foreman there, he was, some people thought he was mean and whatnot, and they're like, oh, he doesn't want to help. But after learning and working with him, because I had no choice, that was the guy I went to. Man, he ended up being like awesome, and he would help out as long as you showed you put forth effort into trying to figure out the problem on your own.
Okay.
And that's where, like, oh man, as far as, hey, here's the code, what do you think? He'd look right back at me and be like, well, what do you think?
Yep.
And then, okay, well, where should I go from here? And, he would kind of give you, okay, well, check this. And then, even if you're like, well, how do I check it? Well, now you need to go back to your, at the time, I forgot what the program was that Mercedes used, but, go check there. And if you still can't figure it out, come get me. But he would give you some bait, and then but it would come with some work. But as long as you were showing that you put in the work, and if you came to him with the, I've checked A, B, C, and D, X, Y, Z, I'm still not an answer. Then he's like, all right, well, let's take a look at it together. And I learned so much that way. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, he sounds like that's exactly what you want in a mentor, is, knowing when to, give somebody the answer, or when to withhold it and get them to figure it out for themselves. And I know I've experienced that both in the field and at school, where you do just kind of have to step back and let them struggle through something, but know when, okay, they're in over their heads. They're really frustrated. They're going down a complete wrong direction. Okay, let's step in and give them a hand. That's how you learn. That's really important. We just need to see more of it, I think, is the thing. And maybe it's just as simple as each one of us taking a responsibility to do that ourselves. But, there has to be enough in the industry to make a big change to keep and capture all the young people that are coming into the industry, so they don't go elsewhere.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, what was after Mercedes, or how long were you there for?
A little over 4 years, and then I left to try some, try the restoration world.
Okay.
And working on older cars, and it was a pretty poor experience, to say the least.
Just the amount of work or quality of work, or what was the problem there?
Yeah, the quality, man, they would really, there were days where it was a mental struggle to do the things they were asking because they were charging somebody for some really shady stuff. And I'm like,
Okay.
it's hard for me to go forward with this because I'm not comfortable with this. The customer would not be happy with this, but yet you're telling me like, well, get it done. And yeah, lack of equipment. The building was so, terrible that there were days where I legit like would walk through and I'm like, man, this could collapse on me right now. And so, yeah, that only lasted about 5 or 6 months.
Okay. All right.
And then from there, yeah, I actually went back to the same dealer, but they had an Audi brand. They also have Audi there. And I went there for a little over 2 years. And that's where I learned the majority of the Audi stuff.
Okay. And you're still doing that to this day, or?
I'm at a smaller shop, and they specialize in Audi, Volkswagen, and GM, and it's mainly performance stuff. But then also kind of, hey, if somebody wants something done, I guess the guy who plans all the jobs and stuff, he'll come to me and say, hey, is this something we want to get into? And we'll talk about it, and then we'll decide if we want to go forward with it. Just like this, these few really big problem childs that we've come across here.
Well, speaking of, where do we start the story with, would you say it was A6 or what was the model?
So I have an S4 and an S6 I'd talk about with you if you wanted, unless you only want to do one. I don't know how much time you have.
No, I got all the time in the world. So wherever you want to start.
Okay. We'll start with the S4. It's I can't remember the year to be off the top of my head. Maybe it's 13, but it's a 3-liter supercharged V6.
Okay.
And a guy just bought it, and yeah, so we'll get into it. And hey, this guy just bought this thing from, I think it was a Maserati dealership down the street. Check engine light comes on, and I immediately think, well, why did it get traded in?
Sure.
And so I'm like, okay. And then brings it in, and it's a, I think system rich, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but system rich fault. And I'm like, okay, interesting. So I go through and I'm checking everything. And then finally I got out the book I bought from Scanner Danner.
Okay.
And that actually helped a lot because it gives you some, good points that you can, all right, check this, crossed it off, kind of like a good list.
Sure.
And so, starts out higher than normal fuel PSI. No, we got it running, got it hot, shut it off, fuel rail pressure climbed. And I was like, well, nothing's leaking off. That's good. And then, what is it? Leaking fuel injectors, which, yeah, same thing. I didn't see anything leaking off. So, cross those off. And then, we ended up getting down to fuel contaminated oil.
Oh, okay.
And, I'm sitting there, and and in this car, and this was another one where I ended up, being at the shop at 10 o'clock at night with a buddy being, just kind of bouncing ideas like, okay, how could this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And so we got down to the problem of, because let me back up. We checked, we drove it and we were checking all the fuel trims, and they would just, as the car, where it kind of threw for a loop is as the car got hotter, it would just go so rich, it was unbelievable.
Okay.
You're like, how is this thing running, basically?
I was going to ask you, how was it actually running as far as the quality?
It ran great.
Okay. Just fuel trims were way out of whack and codes were setting.
Yeah. Like if that check engine light, if somebody put a piece of tape over it or, put the light out, you'd never know the difference. Okay.
All right.
So, anyway, we're messing around with that. And then we change out, I guess the shop owner. He said, put sensors in it. And I'm like, well, I don't want to throw parts at it, but okay, I'll do as you say. Didn't fix anything. Trim's still completely out of whack. So we're sitting there, and it's finally, it's, again, 10 o'clock at night. And we're like, okay, we got down to the fuel contaminated oil, and how can this happen? Where does fuel meet oil? And the only thing we put our heads on was like, okay, the high pressure pump is run off the camshaft. If something in there is somehow letting fuel by into the oil, well then, how would it, well then how would that affect it? Well, with the crankcase vent system on there, it could get down in the oil, gets hot, starts burning, evaporating up, coming through the crankcase back into the breather. And we're like, sure. Well, I doubt that's it, but let's plug it all, we'll unplug it and we'll plug it all off and see what happens.
You block off the PCV.
Yeah, we blocked off the PCV, but then that created a vacuum leak, I guess, on the valve cover. So then we had to plug that as well.
Gotcha.
And as soon as we did that, within seconds, the numbers on the fuel trims came way down, and we're like, no way. Is this it? So then we, just to be sure and not, high pressure pumps more expensive than an oil change, we raised the car up, changed the oil, because, it got at least most of the fuel contaminated oil out of the car. And we're like, all right, well, if tonight it doesn't raise the numbers out of whack with everything plugged in, then it was the contaminated oil, and we're going to go after a pump. And so we did that, and the numbers came down, and it was just, it was one of those like, you got to be kidding me moments.
Right. Yeah.
So we changed out the pumps I did, and then went and drove it, and it's like, I can't believe that was the issue. And so it makes me wonder if this is a more common issue than I'm aware of on these GDI cars.
Yeah, I've seen it a couple times now. And I know I've heard about it a few more, but I've only ran into it once or twice. And I'm actually trying to remember the vehicle. I think it was a GM of some sort, where it was leaking fuel into the oiling system. And I believe it was leaking a low pressure fuel into the oiling system, as opposed to the high pressure part of the pump actually leaking. Because I imagine if that happened, I don't know if it can or does happen, but you'd be like flooding the crankcase with fuel if it was the high side. But on the low side, I think it's just enough that seeps in there to make it so you pull that dipstick and it smells like gas. Could you see any like visual signs of that thing leaking when you pull the pump out?
No, not at all. That's what's weird.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I tried to move some things around, so like, oh, maybe it's got some play in it, or this and that, and no. And I think you are right. Like, I'm gonna guess the low side coming in as it pressurized, it was leaking into the crankcase.
Okay.
Or excuse me, leaking onto the camshaft.
Well, it's funny, you go way, way back to carbureted vehicles, and you had fuel pumps driven off the camshaft, and you could have those things leak too. That was way, way back before. When I was just getting started, all of those were like just phasing out. But I remember changing some fuel pumps on the side of the block on those things, and then they got rid of them, and now it's back. So it's interesting how it all goes in a cycle.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that would have. But back then they didn't have fuel trims to look at.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh man, and it's funny you say it comes around in a circle, because a lot of the newer cars, that aren't on the performance side of things, they're really not being able to be tuned. You have to manipulate a sensor by piggybacking it. And a guy at work, he's like, man, we came full circle. We're back to piggybacking sensors like the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I'm just thinking as we're talking here, because you did do the check for the high side to see if it leaked down, and it didn't. So it must have been on that low side that it was leaking through. into the crankcase. But that's definitely something to think about on any GDI vehicle, that you could be doing that. Could you smell it? Like if you pull the dipstick, could you smell gas in there?
Yeah, and that was you know, that was another thing that sort of threw me for a loop, because I've thought I've smelt that before, and they get these other people that are just overly confident or whatever, that they make you, question yourself. I'm like, man, that smells like gas. No, that's just how oil smells. And you're like, oh shit, okay. But I'm pretty sure that's not what it smells like,
Right. Well, that's good. Got that one wrapped up.
Yeah, and this next one's a doozy. So the next one I can start on it. It's an Audi S6. It's 2015. So this is a 4-liter twin turbo V8, and it's a hot V. So the turbo's on the center, intake manifolds are on the outside of the cylinder heads.
Okay. All right. I have never worked on one of those before.
Ooh, like when you first look at them, or at least when I did, the first one, I was like, I don't know. Somebody else do this. I don't want to touch this thing. It just looks so overly complicated.
Yeah.
Just basically, that's probably how every engine is, though. And then once you get in it, you're like, oh, this isn't that bad.
Yeah, it's just all more. It's nuts and bolts, and then there's some engines with more nuts and bolts.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, this was a tough one, because I had no information on it. So is the thing where, hey, guy says he had it at a different shop. They put turbos on it and they blew up. So they put more turbos on it, 2 more turbos on it. And the first time he got into it, it made a noise, and now it's running like crap. And
okay.
And it needed turbos once again, and he's like, he's going to tow it here. And so I'm like, okay, sure. And, because I was told, like, all we're doing is putting turbos on it. Fine.
Okay.
And so I put turbos on it, and as soon as I fired up, cylinder 4, cylinder 5 misfires. And I was like, here we go. Here's the start of it. What could I have done wrong?
Yeah. Oh, sure. I know that feeling, right? It's like, even has nothing to do with what you did. You're just like, okay, well, what did I mess up?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I didn't touch anything that basically could do this, but I'll take the blame for it. Why not?
So at this point, you don't know anything about like what the original concern with the vehicle was?
No, I had no clue. And that's my thing is, when I fired it up, okay, like, what did I do wrong? But at the same time, were these misfires here? Like, like, I put turbos on it just as, we agreed to, but did I cause these misfires, or are they here? Like, this would be information that I would love to know.
Sure.
So, once again, we're going through, we're checking everything, we're changing. And mind you, these cars are a huge pain just to do spark plugs on. So to swap around a plug and coil was time consuming. It's not your normal, just cool, this will take 5 minutes. Like, there's a pretty in-depth deal to it. And, so I swap around coil and plug, and, listening, and I learned it from definitely your podcast and reading and whatnot, like, sometimes the cylinder can be, that it's telling you is misfiring, can be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I swap around the coil and plug, no difference. Okay, cool. Well, then all of a sudden it goes from, 4 goes away, but now it goes to 5, cylinder 5, and which is on the other side of the engine, but they're in the same, they're right after another in the firing order. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, maybe this is wrong, and now it's cylinder 5. So,
okay.
I go to the other side, swap coil and plug. Doesn't go away. Cylinder 5, cylinder 5, cylinder 5, as I'm chasing this. Well, then all of a sudden, I think I put it all back together, and I'm like, okay, well, what can we check now? And then it jumps to cylinder 4 again. And, it's like I was just chasing this back and forth. It was cylinder 4 only, cylinder 5 only, cylinder 4 and 5.
Huh.
And it got really, really old.
Just a quick question, because I'm not super familiar with Audis. Does this have like live misfire counters in the data stream, or are you going after or off of codes, or what is the reference for misfires on this one?
Yeah, so it did have a misfire. Oh, what was that? A misfire counters.
Okay, cool.
So we were able to, I think it's called Ross Tech or VCDS or Badgecom or, and so you're able to watch it. And again, it was jumping back and forth. And so I'm scratching my head and just like, man, and so for a minute, I went to like, okay, well, we're going to stop what we're doing. We're going to check wiring. Cause is this ECM going bonkers?
Mm-hmm.
And so I check wiring to all the coils and everything's good. And so we checked some more wiring. I'm trying to think of where it was. Anyway, it's not important. But we moved to, I think it was probably about the time I got to, I asked you, but we moved to compression checks. Just like, okay, cool. Maybe, he said as soon as he got into boost, it made a noise and now it runs like crap. Like maybe he dropped a valve.
Sure.
And so we're doing our compression checks, and there's some differences, but on different cylinders. So everything was within spec per Audi, which was, spark plugs out, fuel injectors not running, throttle body, wide open or, to the floor, and crank it over. And everything was within 180 to 220 PSI.
Okay. All right.
And, and I think their spec was 130 was wear limit. So I'm like, well, we're nowhere near there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, I was like, I'm not going to go down that hole or that rabbit hole. Yeah. So then I started up and I'm letting it run for a while, just to kind of think. And and it's smoking really bad too. And I'm like, well, man, maybe, I'm looking at fuel trims and it was on the richer side of things, but at the same time, mind you, I didn't mention this, but the car had been tuned.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That throws a whole nother, can of worms in there.
Yeah. So you're looking at these fuel trims and like, all right, well, this would be rich to me, but is this what it's tuned for?
Mm-hmm.
And all that. So anyway, it's smoking, and we've checked everything under the sun as far as I'm concerned. And so it was, all right, same thing. I think we have a stuck injector just because they're loading up the cylinders. It's getting rich. That's why it's smoking so much. And we finally made a decision to, all right, we're going to put injectors in it. And this one, we were not for sure by any means. And I didn't feel comfortable doing it because on these engines, you have to drop the whole thing out, as I sent you a picture, just to do the injectors.
Okay.
Because they're on the outside. Well, the frame rails are on the outside, and there's no way you're getting to them. Or maybe somebody on the internet, but not me.
Gotcha.
And so, I lower the engine down, engine and trans on this table, and I get the front of the intake manifold off. It's kind of three pieces, one on each cylinder head, and then the one on the front of the engine that kind of, I guess, wise off in a sense, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I get that part off, and I'm like, okay, and I'm just organizing, as I'm going and cleaning things up, and I walked by and I could see down the intake manifold on the driver's side of the engine. And I see this, thing, and I'm like, oh, what is that? Like some sort of sound deadening in there? Like, are they like, what is that? And then I get the flashlight out, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, that's on cylinder 5. And I look even closer, and it's a rag.
Inside the manifold?
Inside the manifold, down the intake manifold runner. Like I imagine like Pac-Man just chewing, like the piston and valves just chewing on this thing.
Oh my God.
So I yank it out of there, and I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let me look on the other side. Lo and behold, cylinder 4, another rag.
Oh man.
Yeah. And so it was a ton of work, but what a relief we found it.
Yeah, you got it for sure.
Yeah. Not this, gonna put injectors in it and put the engine all the way back in the car, get it all hooked up and fired up and hope that it's good.
Yeah.
So that was, oh man, that was quite the relief. So anyway, I got it fired up yesterday, still smoked so bad, but
okay.
I think when maybe when the second set of turbos took a dump, I think it dumped a bunch of oil like everywhere, and I tried to clean out as much as I could. And I also think through the exhaust, the cats, the resonators, and the mufflers were just soaked in oil.
Okay, I gotcha. That would make sense. So yeah, I wonder where along the line those rags made their way in there. You always wonder, okay, what was the initial failure, and then how did this proceed? Because obviously, after a repair of some sort, it got worse, and then it left that shop somehow or another. So it's just very interesting to how it made it to you.
Yeah, it is funny because I even thought like, okay, benefit of the doubt, this guy had the front of it off and he said, well, I don't want anything to fall in here, even though it's completely straight up and down. Like the chances of you dropping a screw or something are very slim.
Uh-huh.
And maybe he put a rag in there and was okay. Like he forgot it, put it all back together. And when this guy got on it, it sucked him in. And, that's when it started to run my crap.
Uh-huh.
But then another guy was saying, possibly that, well, maybe they wonder if the shop it got pulled out of, they didn't have the greatest attitude about it, that they put him in there on purpose and was like, well, good luck with this. And then, so when I fired it up, it was my fault, but regardless, I found it and I was extremely excited.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, yeah, that would be a tricky one for anybody to diagnose, because going back to what you were saying with the first car, you're sitting down with your buddy and you're going through a list of things that could cause a problem. And if I'm going through a list of things that cause a problem of a misfire, at least prior to this conversation, rag in the intake would not be one of those things on the list, right? And so it's not even on my mind to check for that. And I don't even know, besides taking it apart, how do you check for that? I mean, maybe Brandon Steckler's got a waveform of one in a vacuum pulse sensor or something. Now, this is what a rag in a manifold looks like, but it wouldn't even be on my mind. So, I mean, that you found it is awesome. I've actually seen that happen twice, rags in manifolds. One was caused by myself as a young technician. I had a manifold off of an old Ford. Okay. Yeah. I had a manifold off of a Ford Escort, and I was cleaning the gasket surface because it was old paper gasket and you really had to work to get those clean. And so I shoved rags, the little blue shop rags, the paper ones. I shoved them in each 4 of the intake ports, and it was on the kind of the back side of the head, so it wasn't facing me. Cleaned everything up, and then I got distracted. I went back, I bolted up the manifold. Well, I never took the rags out. Okay. Now, lucky for me, mine didn't even start. I crank it and it does not start. And I'm like, okay, I messed something up. And I took it apart and I was able to dig out all the rags because I figured it out pretty quick. I was like, oh yeah, I didn't take those out. So I caused it, but at least I fixed it before I went out the door. But I saw it one other time and it wasn't all the way into the manifold. It was in the air duct from somebody servicing the vehicle, and it got wedged in the throttle. So it was a friend of mine, and she called me and she's like, yeah, I had my car worked on the other day, and now it's I don't know if it's idling really high or if it's revving really high because the throttle was like wedged open by this rag that was getting pulled through.
Oh, and, no.
Yeah. So I pull the air duct off, and it's this red your classic red shop rag that's just wedged in there. And it's like, okay, well, it's fixed now. That's
wow. Yeah. Hey, good thing you found it. And it didn't go through the engine.
yeah, no kidding. Or peg the thing wide open or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was that a drive-by wire or was that still cable?
Yeah, it was still cable. That was quite a few years ago. So yeah, that would have just pegged her wide open. So I think she had the wherewithal to actually shut it off because it was revving so high. But yeah, it's amazing the problems that we cause for ourselves in this industry, the man-made issues that are brought onto these vehicles. You just hope you can catch your own mistakes, right? That you can find the dumb thing that you did and not have to leave it up to someone else to resolve, like you had to do for whoever caused that problem.
Oh yeah. And there's so many times where you do it, but it's, it happened, but man, it's like, you could bet a lot of money that you won't do it again because you learned very, very well from that mistake.
Yeah, no kidding. That's one of the best teachers is messing something up for most people anyways. I know I do. If I screw something up, I'm never going to forget it.
Yeah.
Well, that's those are both very interesting. I really like the rag one. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was cool to find it. It was stressful though, just because I'd never done the 4-liter job on those cars. So when I went to fire it up, it's like, well, okay, did I put the injectors in correctly? Is the manifold sealed correctly? Like I did torque everything down to spec. I marked it but then it was taking a while to fire up just to build fuel pressure again. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, cool. I'm gonna have to drop this engine. I'll figure it out. And then it finally fired up. I was like, oh, all right, cool. Yeah.
No, that's a good feeling to have it all back together, working properly.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, and then that's the thing though, you struggle through this stuff. The ones that really kick your butt in the big picture, in the long run, those are the ones that help you the most, right? Once you're past it, everything else seems a little bit easier. Every other job is just, well, it's not the rag in the intake job. So I'm doing pretty good today,
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, speaking of those, I actually had a question for you on, because I feel like I think I'm new. I'm not very good at the diagnostic stuff. I think you and a ton of the people you've had on the podcast are light years ahead of me. But the thing I hear you guys all say in common is like you learn how the system works. You go back, you'll read how the system works, and then you come up with a plan. And I always wonder where you're getting your info on how the system works, because I definitely learned from Mercedes. They were very good at, the sensor. Well, where is the sensor doing, and who controls it, and what things affect it around it, and all that. And it seems like without being in the dealership world, or even Audi kind of sucked at it, but it's hard to find those descriptions on how systems work. So, like, what are you doing for it?
Yeah, well, I can tell you right now, European vehicles are where I struggle with that the most, because even if I do have access to service information, it's vague at best. Obviously, my first answer is service info, right? But that does fall short. So
now, service info, like through like a pro demand or a missile?
Yes. So this would be either pro demand, all data, or Identifix, which in 99% of the cases is just regurgitating factory information, right? So that I'm not having to subscribe to several different factory websites for OE info. I can just do, one or two of those and then get it. It's kind of rehashed, right? But a lot of the times it's direct from service info, or from factory info. Maybe some is missing, and then that's when you got to pay the short-term script to get in there. But yeah, I'll go into like an all data, and it's organized very well in all data. And you can go into a component, you click on transmission, and then you go into the description operation. And that's where I live a lot of the time, is in description operation. And for a lot of vehicles, not all, but a lot of vehicles, it has really good layouts of how this works, how the components set up, what's involved, how it's supposed to function under what settings. And again, different manufacturers will do it better than others. I struggle with European. Sometimes when I can't find it there, I'll go into the code information. If it's something that has a code, right? Which today I think most things are, but you can go into the code set criteria, and a lot of times they'll explain a system more there through how it's faulty. They'll say, okay, well, this is how this thing's supposed to work normally, this code setting, because it's not doing this normally. And you might get an extra piece of information on a function of a system or component that they don't have laid out for you elsewhere. That's the other place that I'll usually get it from. And then if I don't have it there, then I'm reaching out to other sources, like different social media groups, friends in the industry, maybe some YouTube videos. It's, there's quite the library of information out there as well. You got to filter through some junk, but there is some good info out there.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess that's pretty much it. And then if nobody's got anything, I gotta try to figure it out for myself, mess around with it, or get a known good. I guess that would be the other way. And, guys that are at dealerships, they're at an advantage there, because, maybe they can get their hands on one that's working, run some tests, see how it reacts to stuff, and then compare it to the one that's not working. And they might have a little better idea of what's going on.
Oh man, at the dealership, we used to, if there was a car that on, a brand new car, like in the showroom, but it had the part we needed, like we were yanking it.
Okay.
For a known good. Like it was actually pretty funny. You're like, oh, that car hasn't even been like pre-delivery inspected. It just rolled off the truck an hour ago. Well, we need a known good. Go grab it.
Yeah, I mean, well, hey, if it's going to prove something out to you and you can get that car on the road, then it's totally worth doing it. I think if any one of us had an endless supply of known good parts, we would use them more often than we'd like to admit. But unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of vehicles.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, with the information and how systems work, I feel like that's going back to, the mentorships and whatnot. But I feel, there is an aspect, to this trade of, obviously we're taking things apart and putting them back together, hopefully without breaking anything and putting it together properly. But, especially this day and age, you got to really know how the systems work. But then even more than that, you got to know where to go to find out where the systems work. So just helping the guys just starting, or even myself, I need to get better at it as far as, hey, this is how you get to finding the information you need to figure out where you're going to go with your diagnostic steps. Because if you don't know how that system works, there's no, I guess without loading the parts cannon or whatever, there's no, like, you shouldn't be trying to diag it.
Yeah, 100%. If you don't really understand how something works, I don't see how you'd have a chance of trying to figure out what was wrong with it. That's one of the most fundamental things that I try to get across to students in the program at school is you have to understand how it works. You have to have an expected result from your test. When you do it, any kind of test, you should expect something. And so often we see people that'll do tests and I don't know, maybe they have an idea, but they don't really even know what to expect if it's good. So then what's the point of the test? Why are you even doing that? Why are you looking at the scan tool data PID if you don't know what should be there, right? And that's where all the legwork behind the scenes comes in to make you a good technician, is figuring out, what is the expected result? What is the known good? What is good for that thing that you're looking at? And then comparing it to what it is. And if you know that, it's easy, right? It's easy to figure these things out. But that's the challenge with this industry is nobody knows it all. You're going to run up against stuff that you don't know how it works. You don't know what the known good is. And that's where all the other resources come into play.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And along with that again is on one of your last podcasts, I think you had Matt Tonslow on, or fans, however you say it. And he was talking about him passing along the information he has learned. And he was kind of like, well, I don't just want to give it away. He wants to find people with passion that did what he, that stayed up late at night reading what he read and all that. I will use myself as an example, but I'm sure there's plenty of people way more enthusiastic about it than me. But it's okay. Well, just where did you go to find this information? We'll read it, but if we don't even know where to go to start reading it, we're at a loss completely. And just again, the if you're going to find out how the system works, but you don't know how to even what website to go to read about it, well, there's a million websites out there. Like, you're going to be guessing for a long time.
Yeah. Being able to even know what's out there and then being able to navigate it. And that's a challenge for somebody that's just entering this industry too, is that there is so much out there. Just to even be aware of all the options and resources out there is an undertaking. And then being able to pick which one that you want to invest your time or invest your money, maybe subscribing to, but then invest your time to actually go through that information. And hopefully it's what you need to fix what you're trying to fix or understand what you're trying to understand. You could waste a lot of time going down the wrong avenue. So even just like you're saying, having somebody to mentor you on what resources to look for, to utilize, is a big piece of it too. But hopefully through like some of the YouTube channels that are out there and some podcasts that are out there, we can help people at least understand, the resources that are present and which ones are valuable, and hopefully it gets people to the answers quicker, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned a lot just from listening to your podcast. And one of the, the biggest questions I've had since your, the first episode I listened to, you're like, oh, so I went and read about this and how the system works. I'm like, okay, where did he get this information?
Okay. All right. Well, it's good that you say that, because then, I can keep that in mind as I'm going through case studies and list it out, right? And say, okay, I went to All Data and it was under this, and here's what the information that I found. I think that's a good idea to reference that so other people can find the same thing.
Sure. Yeah, no. And I mean, you don't have to do it, but I just know, like, again, myself listening, I'm like, cool. All right. Well, how did he get to that step?
No, that is definitely something to keep in mind. Well, cool, man. Do you have anything else for me?
I didn't know if you wanted to go over the dealer versus independent lifestyles and stuff, or we can wrap it up. It's no big deal.
No, dude, I got time. Yeah, and so you've worked in both scenarios, right? Dealer and independent.
This is the first, I guess, sort of independent shop I'm at now.
Okay. All right.
But it's very unconventional, I would say.
Sure. Yeah. When you throw the performance aspect in there too, that kind of makes it a unique experience or a different experience compared to a lot like working at like a Tires Plus or Firestone or something like that. What was the most challenging thing for you, having dealer experience and then going to an independent?
Definitely the resources. And mind you, I'm the only technician, at where I work now, where I'm the guy that works on the cars. We have a few other guys that, everyone knows about cars, but like one guy, he runs the CNC machine. The other guy does, like production management and stuff. And, another guy, he's an engineer for help working with, he's the owner and engineer there. And so if I have a question or like, man, where to find this information? Like, I better figure it out. because I don't, at the dealer, I could just look over and ask my buddy, hey, you know where to find this information? And then if he doesn't, well, then we'll ask the next guy down. There's, 20 techs at Audi. So it's somebody knows where to get the information. And then you're met with a plethora of factory information.
Sure.
And so now, that's why I was saying, like, where to get your info, because we have Pro Demand, and I'm brand new with it. And just as far as where to get what information, and is there a quicker way, and all that. So that's been the biggest challenge.
Yeah. I will say Pro Demand, how the information is organized, is probably my least favorite out of like Identifix, All Data, and Pro Demand. It just seems to be very difficult to find things at times through Pro Demand. The navigation is just not as smooth. It's in there most of the time, but just doesn't always seem to be organized quite as well. So I could definitely see how somebody, if that's their first experience or, first tool that they're using in the aftermarket, would be pretty challenging. All Data kind of has a nice layout to it. It's very standardized across brands, and you see the same thing for each manufacturer, and you can find the same things in the same places regardless of the manufacturer. And I think that really helps out a lot of aftermarket technicians because we're trying to get our heads wrapped around 20 different brands of vehicles, and at least having the information in the same spot every time definitely helps out. So I've always liked All Data.
Okay, well, maybe I'll mess with that, because there's even talking about putting the time in to like figure it out. Like the other night we were watching my girlfriend was watching a movie, and I'm sitting there with the laptop on Pro Demand trying to learn how to navigate it better, and okay, well, what can I look for, and
sure,
all this. And it was still, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm terrible at this.
Yep. It does not flow well. That's how I've always felt. And they've improved it a little bit with their search engine over the years. Cause when I first started using it, I don't even know. Their search feature when it first started was awful. It would pull up the most random, unhelpful things, and it's gotten better. But it's not intuitive to pull up the information. And I don't know, maybe somebody who works for Pro Demand is listening. I have no idea if they are, but it does not flow easily. I mean, it's like using Google, which obviously everybody's familiar with. It works pretty well to find what you need, and then trying to go use Bing, and it's similar, right? You can find it probably on Bing, but it's not going to be as easy, and it's not going to do what you want it to do. I do like Identifix too, and I've been using Identifix more and more, because I think Identifix lends itself really well to somebody doing diagnostics specifically. Like for the repair procedures and stuff, honestly, I'd probably stick with, All Data and Mitchell. Not that they're not in Identifix, but they're easier to find in All Data or Mitchell. But for Identifix, if you pull up a component, like let's say I pull up a radiator fan, right? So it's going to pull up all the top hits and whatever, but it's also going to pull up wiring diagrams right there, TSBs right there, component locations right there, everything that you want on one page. And then you just click the links, and then it'll open up a link, and then you can still scroll on the same page. So maybe I've got component location right there. I scroll up a little bit, and then I've got a wiring diagram right above it. And now I've got a connector pin out right above it, and I'm just scrolling all on one page. I don't have to go back. I don't have to have multiple windows open. For diagnostics, it's really good. It gets a bad rap because of the parts cannon, right? That it encourages a parts cannon, but they actually really do have a good setup for information for diagnostics through Identifix.
Oh, okay. Well, cool. Yeah, maybe I'll see if we can switch to that then.
Yeah. Okay. So if I had to pick one out of the three, like say I could only have one, I'd probably go with Identifix. And if it was two, I guess I'd go All Data and Identifix. I do find myself utilizing All Data sometimes, like again, for like repair procedures, or there's certain things where All Data is very easy to find what you're looking for because of their consistent format for things. If that makes sense. Like I always know where to find. I'm trying to think of an example here of something from just recently. For like what transmission is in my vehicle, right? And maybe if you know a car line that's easy, GM, we'll just look at the RPO code. Okay, well, maybe I don't know this Nissan and I don't know what of 3 transmissions is in there. On the front page, there's an application and ID tab. You click on that, and then it'll have a list of things like engine, transmission, so on and so forth. You click on transmission, it'll show you, okay, here's the tag or here's the information that you need to know for that transmission. And it's always there, right? As long as the manufacturer supplied that info, it's always going to be in that same spot. So
nice.
For simplicity's sake, and just repetition, and I know where all that stuff is, I like All Data. But again, for focused diagnostic stuff, I think Identifix beats the other two out there.
So do you have all 3? You subscribe to all 3?
So I'm able to use all 3. I have my own subscription for a couple of them, but then we have all 3 of them through the school. So that because we want the students exposed to all of them, because we don't know what they're going to go use once they're out in the field. And so I do get to use all of them at the school, and so I can get a good feeling for each one of them. But yeah, I guess that would be my choice. If I can only pick one, it'd be Identifix, at least for what I do. I think it's the most helpful.
Okay. Do you ever I'd say the most frustrating part with the German cars is, let's say you're using the search tab, but they come up with some other crazy word or words to describe a part that like these words you've never heard of or would never think of. So therefore you'll never find it because you're not even calling it the right part. And I didn't know if like American or Japanese do that too, or I guess Korean as well.
Well, they do. I mean, they 100% do. But even Toyota, which I don't mind working on Toyotas. They're really not that much of a struggle. But like if you look at their wiring diagrams, their acronyms on the diagrams for stuff, like when you follow a pin to the ECM and it says like TCHWY, I'm like, I have no idea what that means. Like, is this a signal wire? Is it a ground wire? Like what is, and I'm sure that information's in there. PJ is probably screaming at me right now, like, just go here. It's super easy. Right. But I'm not a Toyota technician. They'll call their like evaporative system valves weird names, like, and I think Honda did this too. It's like, vacuum switching valve. So it'd be a VSV valve. I'm used to it as a purge valve or a vent valve or something like that. And they have a weird acronym for it. I think all manufacturers do that to a point. I mean, even German vehicles, I remember the first time I worked on one and I saw DME on the scan tool. And never in a million years would have thought that was the engine computer, right? I'm looking for ECM or PCM or something like that. I'm like, I can't even find the engine computer in here. What's the deal? Everybody's got their own weird name for stuff.
And DME, what manufacturer was that?
So that's like BMW and Mercedes, and it's digital motor electronics, I think is what that stands for, but that's your engine computer on a Beamer or a Mercedes. And so, just really strange stuff like that. And I mean, there's so many modules on cars now too. Like there'll be a name for a module a lot of times in a European, but I mean, even some of the domestics, I'm like reading the name for the module. And I'm reading words, but I'm like, I don't even know what that does. It's like central auxiliary electronic control module. I'm like, I have no clue what that thing is even for. I've never heard of it. I've never worked on this vehicle. And so, going back to what you're saying, I'm trying to figure. Yeah, where it doesn't exist on this car. I have no clue. It's a battle. It's a battle to take all this stuff in. So going back to what you're saying, like an independent technician try to take on all this stuff. It's crazy to try to get your head wrapped around all this stuff.
Yes, it is. It's a struggle, but it's also, like with the ones you figure out, and when, each day when you learn something a little new or you find the information you're looking for, you're like, all right, sweet. We're chipping away, making a little progress here.
Yeah. Yeah. And the more you do it, the more you can pull on, from previous experiences.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can remember them all. I've been starting to document stuff in my phone. I have a Google Sheets, and I'll just start documenting stuff. I'm like, you know what? That's important information, or that's something that might be useful someday. I'm going to put it down under my Audi page that I have, and maybe I'll need it. Maybe I'll pull it up someday, because I know that I'm not going to remember all of it. So at least I have a reference here just in case. It could just be stored in the cloud, and someday I'll come back to it.
Yeah, that's a great idea, though. So what are your thoughts on? So I have a buddy who he's still in the dealership world, and man, he's a bright guy. He was the one who was helping me with both these cars, actually. But he, because I told him, I really enjoy diagnostics, and I just want to learn and soak it all in and just really get good at it. And he keeps telling me, he's like, don't waste your time. They, like, nobody cares for them. Nobody wants to pay money for a guy that only does diagnostics. Like, they want a guy who knows nothing about diagnostics, but can hang 60, 80 hours worth of parts. And it's like, man, I don't know. I feel like maybe right now, but in the years to come, I don't know. I don't think they'll have as much of a place as they do now. The parts hangers, at least.
Well, I think both is true. There's always going to be a place for the parts hanger, right? Because the cars are always going to break. They're always going to need parts. What I think is already happening, and it's going to happen more as we progress, is the need for someone to tell him what parts to put on, right? That's getting more and more common, and there is a huge need for it. You see the rise of how many different mobile technicians are starting across the country. Just in the last, 4 years, it seems to be, at least to me, maybe my perspective is limited, but it seems to me like there are way more people taking this on as a career and starting businesses doing specifically that, because there's a demand for it, right? Because shops and people need somebody to figure these crazy problems out. And so, yeah, you got to have somebody to tell that parts hanger what parts to put on there. So I think both can exist. And it's really just a matter of what you want to do as a technician. What's your goal at the end of the day, or the end of the end of your career, or whatever? Are you there to make as much money as humanly possible in this trade? Well, honestly, parts hanging is probably the way to do it. I know guys that are very, very financially successful, and they're just flat rate monsters, and they couldn't care less about the diagnosis beyond what they have to do. And then obviously I talked to them on the podcast. I know guys that dedicated their life to the more technical diagnostic side of it. And I think each person just kind of has to make the decision for themselves, what's going to be best for them, or what's going to, for me, it's what's going to interest me more, right? Like, I got bored with parts hanging because it was monotonous. It was the same thing over and over again. And okay, yeah, I'm making a good income, but it got to a point where it wasn't challenging me on a regular basis, right? I get a broken bolt every once in a while. Cool. Well, that's a challenge, I guess, but that's not what I was seeking out. And so I wanted to pursue, something a little bit differently that would challenge me more. And trying to figure out what's wrong with these cars today, it definitely does that.
Yeah, no, I think actually, yeah, I would agree with that statement that, yeah, the need for both, and more the need for people to figure out what parts to change. Yeah, I can completely agree with that.
But yeah, the dealer versus independent too, that's a decision a lot of people have to make as well, because there's a place for each one. Again, it all goes down to what you want out of your daily job or what you want out of your career. And I think you can find different things. I know you can find different things between dealer and independent. It's just all about what your style is as an employee, as a technician. And there's a right place for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just, there's so many shops, like, especially kind of out by us or whatever, that we'll drive to, like you drive past on lunch and you're just, they're pretty run down. And it's like, how are you guys making it at this day and age, compared, and this is just me saying this from being in a dealer where everything's updated every 3 years. You're putting a facelift on the front of the building. The waiting area's got to be nicer than people's homes. And then you got this guy's shop and you're like, do you guys own a computer in there? Like, really?
Yep. No, I know. I go to some of those shops where it's like, wow, how are you doing this? And I think with some of those, it's the clientele that they're working with kind of matches their level of professionalism. And at least when you get closer to, like, big cities and you go closer in the cities, it seems like there's more availability for the clientele that matches those kind of shops. I don't know. That's the nicest way I can say it, but
yes, no, I understand.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, yeah, no, that's all I had on the list, I think.
Okay, that's going to do it for today's episode. I want to give Devin one more big thank you for coming on, spending the time to talk with me here. I enjoyed that talk quite a bit. Hopefully you did as well. Also like to give a big thank you to everybody who's been listening and reaching out about the podcast. Can't say enough about that. Thank you very much. Honestly, mean that. So with that out of the way, let's all get out there and start fixing the world one car at a time.